Today we're going to talk about the best practices and how to install your cylinder jugs. Before installing your cylinder jugs, be sure that you've followed our other tutorials that have led up to this point. The cylinder jugs should be thoroughly washed, cylinder base rings installed, piston ring gap checked, piston rings and pistons installed. Also, be sure that any alignment dowels needed between the crankcase and cylinders are installed now. We also like to have the head gasket fitted and the cylinder head ready to go, because it's best practice to fully assemble the top end and torque the head bolts down in one sitting. Begin the cylinder jug install by thoroughly cleaning the upper crankcase gasket surface, as usually you get a little oil on it when you're installing your pistons. This is also a good opportunity to check that the piston ring end gaps are still facing the correct way. The upper and middle ring gaps should be facing 180 degrees apart from each other, and the three pieces of the oil ring should all have their end gaps facing 120 degrees away from each other. These vintage Hondas also often have cam chain tensioner components installed between the crankcase and the cylinder jugs, so be sure to refer to your Honda service manual to make sure you have any required pieces installed either in the upper crankcase opening or the cylinder jugs already. Lastly, be sure to give the inside of the cylinders, the pistons, the piston rings, the crankshaft, anything that needs a light coating of oil should get it now before you install the cylinders. Once everything is ready, first we install the cylinder base gasket. The cylinder base gasket is notorious for leaking around the oil passages, so when installing a fresh gasket, we like to add a small amount of Hondabond 4 around the oil passages of the upper crankcase and the bottom of the cylinder. We do not recommend using any form of RTV for this. Be sure to only use Hondabond 4, 3-bond, or a equivalent gasket maker. Install the base gasket, and then position the cylinder jugs on the upper part of the engine studs. Before lowering the cylinders down onto the pistons, run the cam chain up through the cylinders and secure it. In the Honda service manual, Honda calls for the use of a piston ring compressor, but we found with the tapered bottom of the cylinder that these motorcycles use that you don't really need it. Instead, position the cylinders to where they are sitting on the pistons and compress one ring at a time gently into the grooves with your fingers. When you squeeze it together, it should slip easily into the tapered bottom of the cylinder. Do this one at a time across all the pistons to slowly work the pistons into the cylinders without breaking any rings. Do not hit or hammer the cylinders down onto the rings to force them in, as this can break them. After the cylinders are installed, you can continue assembling the top end of your engine according to your Honda service manual.